ad tech and beyond. In this new series from Croud, we'll be exploring the biggest trends and developments in the world of ad tech. I'm Kevin Joyner, Croud's Director of Planning and Insight. We're kicking off with one of the hottest topics for marketers in 2020 so far, life after the third-party cookie. But particularly, we're focusing on what this means for user experience and ad creative. So for clarity, just right now in this conversation, when we refer to user experience, we're not focusing on web and app user interfaces. Instead, we're talking about the wider experience of the user's perceptions of digital advertising activities. There are some pretty fundamental changes underway in our industry. Over most of its history, digital advertising has exploited the ability to collect data from individuals across the sites and apps that we all use. The label surveillance marketing is probably a fair one. But in recent years, there's been a series of shocks and shifts. The EU GDPR, then Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook scandal. Now, Apple's increasingly aggressive intelligent tracking prevention. And recently, Google's commitment to end support for the third-party cookie in Chrome. The first two of those are widely understood in society as well as business. The second, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, was a mainstream front-page event, and Apple's positioning on privacy is a consumer, customer-facing proposition. So we can safely say these changes in our industry aren't just professional or technical, they're related to real impacts in cultures and society. We know that targeting and measurement are set to change. And this is a challenge for the professionals in our industry, the people like most of us who run campaigns and provide advertising services. But the topic, it's much more user-facing. We might expect that online user experience and digital creative are going to change too. So, to our guests, and thank you very much for joining today, everyone. We have Maz Hussain, who heads up Croud's paid media and creative division, including programmatic and social advertising. We have Anthony Macro, who runs Croud's social advertising team, working across clients in retail, finance, and the charity sector. And the last of us from Croud, we have Maria Evrenos, Croud's creative production lead, who specializes in creative strategy and cross-channel digital innovation. So I want to start by asking, do you agree that the public is increasingly aware of privacy, data protection, and the operation of digital advertising? And if so, do you think it makes any difference at all?
I think the caveat that we always need to remember when we talk about these things is, all of us and lots of people in our industry, we're not what you would class normal people, in that we kind of know all about this stuff, right? We know the details. We're not your average consumer. So when we hear things like privacy, or when you see an ad that's kind of, a remarketing ad for a product you saw the day before, you kind of look at it with a different set of eyes. So I think it's really important for us to try and kind of think about what this means for the average consumer, and taking that marketer's hat off. Your question kind of had two elements to it. The first one was around awareness. The awareness level has increased massively, not just from things like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which again made kind of mainstream news, but also things that appear when users interact, like user experience on websites, the pop-ups for consent and a number of other areas, which mean that people are just seeing these messages kind of more often. So awareness is up. The second part is, does it make a difference? It doesn't feel like it's making much of a difference, in the sense that people are just kind of accepting and carrying on, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you guys kind of go into your detailed cookie settings and kind of, select which partners you're willing to share your cookies with, but anecdotally from people I speak to that are not in the industry, they'll accept and they'll just carry on. And that feels like the extent of the difference that it's made. And then when I think about services I use, like Google Maps, incredibly valuable, makes a massive difference to my kind of, daily life. I'm happy with that value exchange. I'm happy to share my data because I'm getting a great service that I don't kind of need to pay for. So ultimately, it doesn't feel like it's making a difference. And some of the stats around things like Facebook's monthly unique users have continued to go up, even in and around that Cambridge Analytica scandal. So it doesn't feel like it's making too much of a difference right now.
I think that sort of behavioural inertia is pretty well understood and accepted. And when I think about the closing of support for third-party cookies in Chrome, it's a bit like addressing these privacy and data protections issues. You know, principally it's about privacy, isn't it? Without requiring the user to opt in. It's just saying this needs to change. There's a movement in our industry. And so we will change the browser, the way the browser works. It's not a tick box or a I accept button. It's just something that's going to happen, which is a bit different. Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's it's becoming one of those things where changes will slowly start to be introduced that kind of force the hands of how people are kind of treating their data, because you know some of the regulations and the wording are making your cookies be thought of as very valuable, highly confidential personal data, and people may not really appreciate or understand it. So there are other kind of initiatives that are happening to try and enforce some of that change.
And did you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think just to build on Maz's point slightly, there seems to really be the two camps where either the understanding hasn't progressed within the sort of the customer base to the extent that that they're perfectly happy with the way things are and accepting these different terms, or in kind of the bubble we live in, and with the understanding we have and some of the public will, the value exchange is still great enough to allow sort of business as usual. I do think the one area where this has adjusted slightly over the past year has been the increase in, I guess, acceptance of the subscription model for all different types of services. I think even a couple of years ago in the UK in particular, the idea of paying for a newspaper subscription would have seemed a bit of a tricky sell, but you can see from the success of the likes of New York Times, The Athletics, how they've come to market, along with the increased usage of Disney Plus and Spotify, that this is a way that people are happy to interact with the internet. And I think what's interesting, and what we might see from this, is that when people do use those services, not only are they getting used to a high quality product, but they're getting used to what an environment without digital advertising prevalent within it looks like, which could then negatively impact their perception of what you'd call, I guess, the open web, where the advertising is still prevalent. And I think that dichotomy is something that is important to be aware of, whether users are aware of that initially or not.
An experience, like an app that's apparently free, though, is still very popular.
Yes.
So what you're saying is probably, again, it's one of these things that's trending, but probably not mainstream for now. Maria, have you got something to add on this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think I agree with all the points. I think there's a combination of people not minding too much giving away their data, but there is definitely, I think, an awareness around targeting now that wasn't really there before, which can make advertising feel quite personal when it appears in your phone, on your own personal laptop, in your home, that there's kind of an awareness that this ad is being sent to me personally, which I think is a kind of a psychological shift that you wouldn't have watching TV, or even just with the way that we've become smarter with using these tactics. So it's definitely something that we keep in mind, that you need to be very respectful when you're trying to have that kind of one-to-one conversation with a consumer, that you don't kind of overstep any boundaries or try to be too aggressive in that approach. Because also, ultimately what we're trying to do, and I think what users have really benefited from this whole operation, is the increased relevancy. And the obviously the aim is not to be creepy or follow them around. It's just to be like, hey, we know you're interested in these products. There's a discount on, or maybe have you seen it in a different color? And we've seen really good results with that kind of marketing and those kind of creatives. So we definitely want that to continue, because we see benefit both from an advertiser and from a user perspective. But it's obviously making sure that those the control is there, and that people are aware how to opt in and opt out, and make sure we have something that everyone agrees to going forward, because I think that's going to be key.
I'm very glad you've begun to talk about targeting, because that brings us to our next question. So one scenario around all of this change is that targeting might become limited to broad cohorts, without being able to identify individual users and their behavior. The result of that may be broad cohorts for targeting. So I'm wondering, is that going to have a material impact on ad creative and the user experience of advertising? Maz, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think so. Having worked in programmatic for a few years now, I think kind of I'm used to working with and kind of dealing with the kind of SKU level remarketing ads that a number of people have seen and kind of a lot of consumers engage with. I think that level of kind of one-to-one remarketing or kind of personalized ad experience will change. I don't think it's going to be possible to be able to identify someone who looks at product A and then delivers them, a one-to-one kind of ad with that kind of individual product. What I think will happen as things kind of move on is we will continue to see things like product level creative and product level marketing, but just on a cohort level. So, I think over time, the algorithms that we run activity on will naturally optimize to things that are getting either a lot of eyeballs or getting a lot of conversions, because that's how those kind of systems work. And I think we can start to be a bit smarter with how we're pushing certain products based on potentially something that needs a bit of more of a push and it's not naturally getting those conversions, or for, if we work kind of a bit more smarter with some advertisers, some of the products that have potentially a higher profit margin than others. So I think feed-based product level marketing will still exist. It's just, it would, instead of it being on a one-to-one level to a user, it will probably be served to cohorts of audience groups.
I might put you on the spot now, so be warned. You're quite naturally talking a lot about the perspective of the advertiser and the marketer, but I'm just interested to know how you think this is going to be perceived by the user on the end of it all. Is it going to feel different? What you're saying, you're kind of saying it can still work and be a bit different, but you're thinking about how we run the ads. I'm just thinking about the user.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. So Maria touched on something in her answer earlier around how we kind of need to be careful about how we approach that personalization with users, and I think if anything, this will actually make the marketing that we do feel more natural and feel more relevant. As in, there was always this concern when somebody went to a website, visited a product, and then found that kind of product chasing them, around a number of different kind of websites. That didn't quite feel that natural, and lots of eyebrows were raised with that. What we're doing instead is we're actually saying if someone is interested, or if there's a group of people that are interested in certain categories of a product, or a certain category that product falls into, we can serve to them relevant marketing that is related to that kind of category, but not necessarily exactly the product that they put in their basket 2 days ago that we want to kind of push them through to convert. So it feels like the shift for the consumers will be a healthier, more natural one, because it's kind of going back a little bit to traditional type of marketing where you kind of treat audience groups and segments as cohorts. So it feels like it will kind of shift towards a bit more of a natural fit. But again, it really depends. We're kind of looking 2 years ahead at what we think will become available, and what we think will be we won't be able to do when it comes to that kind of SKU level remarketing. So that's kind of a prediction for what we can do.
Yeah. So Maria, I just want to come to you now, because it's really a completely different way of targeting. But one of the ideas that comes up in this conversation is about contextual targeting, and I know you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because just because one way of using data is not going to be allowed, there's so many different ways to use data and use data signals, and kind of basing it upon someone's browsing history and exactly where they've been it's definitely not the only way to get to a relevant person with your ads. So I don't think it's going to be a massive loss in that way. And the way that we can do it with contextual ads, for example, is matching it up with what they're browsing, so the video content they're looking at or the articles they're reading, and matching the ads up to work with what they're actually interested in that moment in a way it's even more instant. Doesn't matter if they never read about a football team ever before. The fact that they're on that article today kind of is there's a relevancy there that you couldn't actually get from someone's history, which we think is an interesting one, especially when there's so much more interesting tools now for like using AI and these automated systems to kind of like scan and understand different environments. So there's a lot of opportunities that's being built out around that. And I mean, even at Croud, we have a tool called DaVinci, where it's like scanning imagery and copy and sentiment analysis in real time. And it's like one door closes, but 1,000 doors are opening. And I think in these 2 years, we don't know what the other options will be. And I think even with that thing of not being able to target someone who's put something in the basket and then forgot about it, it might not be possible for people who have not opted in for it. But the way you log into Amazon and you see all the things that you put on your wish list but haven't really committed to, obviously means that depending on the user behavior, these things can still go on, but it just will need a bit more consent and control.
DaVinci was the code name of the project that developed it. Just for anyone who's browsing our website, looking for machine learning driven visual recognition, creative direction, it's called Creative Intelligence. That's the product. Sorry, Maria, I just thought I'd clarify. Okay, Anne, I know you had some thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, I think like Maria and Maz's points are really good in terms of, I think, as we delve into this subject, it's important to keep in mind the time frame between like where we are now in reality and like Maria said, the 1,000 of innovations that are going to come out between now and then. I think when you talk about the idea of broad cohorts, my concern for certain advertisers, particularly those who don't have that the ability to use that product-led approach, even in the new world, as Maz mentioned, maybe they're a single offering or something which is more brand focused, that there could be the tendency to retreat back to more conservative, generic creative in the aim of making sure not to alienate any specific user who they might have been able to exclude in the past. But what they might find from that is that, although the top line metrics are good, while not offending anyone, they are inspiring no one. And I think finding a way for brands being able to find a way to be able to advertise adventurously still in the new world would be really important. And I think those who are willing to, put their neck out and stand for something, whether that's through the tech they use and the techniques they use to implement some of these strategies that Maz is talking about, or just through investment in creative ideas and ideation to try and stand out within this cohort environment.
Thanks for that, Anne. It's probably just as key a factor in user experience of advertising. So we've talked about targeting. The other thing is frequency capping. The number of times the users are seeing the same ad over and over again. And what we can expect with these changes in cookies is that cross-site post-impression data is likely to be either unavailable or severely limited compared to how it is today. And that's likely to have, I'd suggest, result in a loss of control over frequency capping. So my question, do you agree? Does that sound true? Would it be a problem? And if it might be a problem, then how do we mitigate that problem? I think, Anne, you had some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I think some of the other guys will probably go into more of the technical details of it. But given my experience in sort of social advertising, and which Facebook is obviously a part of, as you can imagine, we've kind of been in that space for a long time, where we have a good understanding of what frequency, an average frequency, looks like within a single ecosystem, but the ability to cap frequency, as is common practice within their programmatic and open internet environment, hasn't been there. And the way the platforms and the industry has kind of managed that has been using your performance as a proxy for when frequency is kind of at a bad point, as opposed to saying, right, the frequency cap should be this, that should limit performance. And I think what's quite interesting about it, like essentially the wider internet ecosystem potentially moving towards more this approach, potentially more limited, is that this idea that the average frequency is something which is useful. It might go out the window. What we see across Facebook and some of the other social channels is that by focusing on that metric and focusing on performance, there's potentially like a 1% or 0.1% of our users who are the ones that are being bombarded by adverts and increasing that frequency slightly, who are being lost by the brand completely. And I think that there's an impact of frequency that even within a single ecosystem is misunderstood at the moment. So in answer to your question, yes, in terms of losing these additional controls within the wider internet, I think it is a problem, and it is one we'll need to look to overcome.
Someone once told me that the way that a pilot avoids crashing into another plane midair is not to look at any of the instruments on the dash. You find a speck on the windscreen and line it up with the plane, and if the oncoming plane stays on the speck, then you're going to hit it. Now, I think that might be nonsense, but it's a kind of metaphor for what you're saying, which is that, we've got all these metrics and, we kind of are used to them, and some of them are probably useful indicators, but, frequency for you, it sounds as though if it drops off the dash, it's not, you still got lots of other indicators. Do you think is that a fair summary? Don't worry about all the plane stuff.
No, there's a plane going overhead just as you said that, so I was slightly worried imagining the pilot looking at a speck on his windscreen. But yeah, no, I think you're right. Look, frequency is a concern for some advertisers mainly from a not brand safety, but brand maintenance perspective. But in general, if the bottom line performance metrics remain okay, that's been the measure that frequency is okay, rather than the other way around. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether that approach is adapted across the wider industry.
Now, in the longer term, we're likely to lose third-party cookies, and that's where the Chrome sandbox development is taking over, privacy sandbox. And what you're saying there is that the industry is very aware of the significance of this issue, and something like frequency is likely to be part of the information that's available in that sandbox. So it's being incorporated into that solution.
I think if we, as an agency, when we're optimizing our campaigns, if we look at how we use those data points, we look at frequency and we understand where that optimal frequency point is. So are we delivering too many impressions that won't generate increased conversion or conversion rate? We kind of reduce that wastage by optimizing towards where we see the conversion as high as possible. If we take that kind of methodology, it can be applied to kind of brand engagement and how people feel about the brand. So, if someone hasn't taken an action after a certain number of impressions, are they just not interested? And is anything post that just creating a negative, brand experience for them? So I think that's going to be how we will hopefully be able to leverage some of that frequency data when those new solutions become available in the platforms like DV360. The only thing just to kind of add as well is, and I think you phrased the question well, Kevin, at the start, frequency capping isn't going away, or frequency control isn't going away. There's just going to be a loss in terms of how we do it today. So it's not going to be as easy where we plug into one platform and we can control frequency across a number of different buys. Publisher by publisher level, we still expect it to be available, assuming that publisher has first-party logged in data, and we can work with them on a publisher by publisher level and control that frequency on those individual users. So there is still work to be done there, and more publishers to kind of become a bit more sophisticated in that area. But I think there's still kind of work that can be done in those areas.
I don't know, I've got absolutely no data for this, but I imagine that most users spend most of their time on a small number of apps and websites, and then they have a longer tail of the random sites that we browse onto when we're searching for stuff. So the notion that frequency capping, sorry, on a single publisher site is likely still to work perfectly well, is quite encouraging, because that's going to be fairly effective in terms of like managing the exposure of the ad to a single user. You know, given what I've said about the few sites that are their most, you know, time-consuming sites. Did I manage to make myself clear? And do you think that's probably right?
Yeah, so it's clear, and I'd agree, and it kind of just goes back to Anthony's point. You know, we're gonna have less control at a kind of multi-buy level, but frequency is just one of many different metrics that we look at to optimize our activity. So while it will be reduced and while it will be on just a publisher level, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, you know, buys will become, you know, massively more inefficient, or, you know, or anything like that.
Cool. I'm frustrated, Maz, to admit that I agree with everything you've just said. So I will try to get us all to begin to wrap up and summarize. So I want to hear what people think. What would you say is the most significant way that this shift in the industry is going to change digital creative and the user experience of digital advertising? If there's one main thing about how the user's experience will change, what would you say?
I'm hopeful that it's going to have an impact on how we kind of treat creative execution, not just from like agencies and the advertiser side, but also on the publisher side. So I think everyone has seen those examples where you, especially on a mobile device, you try and read an article and you've got, you know, the banner at the top and then something that appears at the bottom and then an autoplay video, and you get about, you know, a small square in the middle that has the article that you're trying to read. That kind of cluttered bombardment of kind of ads, I hope will kind of slowly shift away, and there are going to be less ads. They're going to be more tailored, whether it's contextually or whether just the creative itself is slightly different. But I just hope that kind of relationship that the user and the brand has with that kind of creative will kind of calm down a little bit, and hopefully it will become a bit more engaging and a bit more impactful.
It's probably wanting a lot of things to remain as they are, but with a renegotiation of what that looks like, and especially more probably at the back end, where things like you're saying, where is this data even stored, is you know, is at the key, probably in some ways more than what the user sees, because that might not feel like a kind of a threat or something that's top of mind for consumers now. But we do see these internet services, like people relying on them more and more, and we might get things like coronavirus tracking apps, you know, worldwide, and people really sharing very intimate detail about whereabouts and relations and health status, and obviously these things become more and more important the more, you know, our lives are integrated with digital. I think in terms of the ad experience, hopefully we will be able to build on, like we were saying, around personalization and the good things about it. And then it will be kind of a technical nightmare for not people like me who have to design the ads, but the people who build the infrastructure and the security at the back end. So that hopefully we can have as fun and as kind of interactive experience as we've had, but with kind of other securities in place for when it's needed.
If anybody's got questions or, you know, worries about that data infrastructure work that Maria's just mentioned, then give me a call. I work for Croud in the data and innovation team. And I'll come to you. How would you begin to summarize things?
Yeah, I think some of the points that the guys before me touched on are the key ones. For me, it's really about the fulfillment of the mobile web experience. I think since really started to come to prominence in one of the many years of the mobile, probably about 5 or 6 years back, I think it's fair to say that based on some of the stuff that Maz mentioned in terms of the way we view consumer websites, it's been a bit of a disappointment and still not an experience that people really enjoy, and it's not really taken off in the way it should. Hopefully, looking at this from an optimistic perspective, with some of these limitations that these additional privacy regulations have put in place around cookie banners, etc., we can really start to make use of that environment and creatively, like to Maria's point, and start to fulfill the promise of what a powerful tool having these devices in our hands at all times allow us and make it a useful experience rather than a frustrating but necessary one.
It's a noble mission. Hopefully this conversation's been helpful for people, but in a way to just see if we can add to that, I'm wondering if anybody's got any reading that they would recommend, or recommended ways to dig further into the topic or to follow up. Can I start with you, Maz? Anything that you've been looking at?
Yeah, I think on the third-party cookie side of things, and kind of the impact that will have on a number of different areas of what we do in our industry, there's some really good webinars called the Cookie Apocalypse. There's two parts to it. I think it's been kind of produced and put out there by Beeswax, Ari Paparo, who kind of runs that business, and they're really interesting. They're quite well kind of explained in terms of, especially for people not kind of too familiar with programmatic and all of the acronyms. That they're quite good to kind of get an idea of what's happening. There's also a lot of pieces. Again, there's a number of different articles and kind of thought pieces on this topic. Wayne Blodwell, who is founder CEO of Programmatic Advisory, puts out some interesting thought pieces on this stuff as well. So definitely kind of check those two out.
Very useful. Thank you. Ant, can I come to you on this one? Anything you'd recommend?
Yeah, I think just to add to Maz's point, the IAB released a big PDF document this month, which was like a guide to the the post third-party cookie era. Quite granular, but a good reading to kind of get you fully up to speed with the current state of play and where things are going. From an industry perspective, the Mobile Fix Friday email newsletter is a good source for everything around the sort of mobile ad tech perfect storm and other industry topics related to this.
Thanks very much. Also very useful. So I just want to check, is there anything that anyone else wants to add? Any reading? If not, then I'll wrap up by saying thanks very much to everyone, and I hope one or two of you will be keen to contribute to the next one in the series. So thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.